Hey guys, my name's Jax Atlantis, and today I want to talk to you about looking at horoscopes and natal charts as if they were paintings, and kind of how we can think about this a little bit differently. If you're someone who is new to astrology, or you've been learning for a while, but you're kind of at this point in particular that I hear a lot of people going through, and in fact this video's creation was due to some of the questions I had recently from some people that are learning astrology, and it's about categorizing how important is Mercury? How important is Uranus? Like, in what way do you sort of organize what is more or less important? And, in one sense, we would say that in our natal chart, well, the personal planets are going to have, so much importance because there's something that is very uniquely us because of the time frame that we're looking at, whereas the more generational planets might not be as important. But the thing is, of course, each and every one of these planets, whether they are fast moving or incredibly slow and moving over decades, all of them are going to be filtered through unique house placements and of course in unique combinations and aspects with the personal planets. So everything in astrology is important. Every single planet is important. And so what I want to do today is I want to take this painting that I made, and just remember, this is not an art lesson, it's purely an astrology lesson. And I want to walk through the different layers of kind of how we can conceptualize the collective energy, because it all gets abstract. When you think about the energy of Pluto and you're trying to keep that in mind while you're thinking about Mercury and you're thinking about the sun as well and what season that we're in, when you're thinking about all these different things, it can get jumbled up and it can become disorganized. So for our very first layer, let's look at Pluto. So Pluto is connected to our collective soul. There is, of course, the polar urges. There's the desire to separate from everything and go completely in our own direction. And then there's the exact opposite desire, which is to return to that state, of oneness and connection with everything and being a part of everything. And stereotypically, we always look at the Scorpio archetype as that exact concept, but manifesting in relationships, through extreme intensity. So we look at this layer in particular, Pluto in Capricorn. And so what I've done is I've just taken the color wheel and I just took the zodiac wheel and put it on top. And so Capricorn will be represented today as like this almost yellowish orange, this sort of like burnt orange, kind of darkened, and it's almost on like the spectrum of a brown color. And so with Pluto and Capricorn, part of the reason we would use such dark shades for this background is because it's in Capricorn. And so, of course, we're in the negative polarity. And the negative polarity isn't exactly the same as saying, evil or the bad polarity, but it's the negative polarity. And so there's, of course, a lot of things that are subtracted. There's a lot of things that are withheld, a lot of things that are taken. And in our collective energy, if we, of course, think back over this past decade, we can sort of see what Capricorn and, governmental institutions, what systems of power entirely, and our conversations about them have yielded, and what they've brought about. And we can see that while there's, of course, our ability to make a difference and our ability to participate in these things, that this is a very deeply instantiated power. Pluto in Capricorn is something incredibly all-encompassing, and it's a part of what it is that we're seeing. It's a part of what's being projected out into the world. And so, of course, there's slashes as the background color of this, these orange slashes. And so this is, because this is Capricorn, it is cardinal, so it's like, definitely a lot of extreme movements. And then we move on to our second layer and we look at Neptune. Now with Neptune, we have, of course, in the second layer, we actually have like, a great mountain, if you will. Neptune is this incredibly lofty, incredibly beautiful, and at the same time, as we can, sort of start to see the underside of that, or the dark side of that, we can see that Neptune, even being in its home sign of Pisces, is once again in a negative polarity. So we're using these darker shades, these darker greens. We've got that cave entrance there, and we all in all can definitely see and feel the shadows, as well as the fact that the power and the beauty of Neptune in the collective consciousness still is something that a lot of times from our point of view can feel very blurred and very off in the distance. It can feel like something that is separate from us, that we have to get to enlightenment, we have to go find enlightenment, and that, it's not, sometimes of course it can just be as simple as participating with the energy of enlightenment, participating as if we were enlightened with other people, and many other things that are much simpler. But the feeling of Neptune in Pisces, especially as we keep in mind Pluto in Capricorn, is very much this great thing that is far away. It's something that would be incredibly difficult to climb up, and a lot of different people are all explaining at the same time how exactly you're supposed to get to the mountain, and the things that you're supposed to do once you get there. Everyone has their own definition of that. And so even where Neptune is in a positive place for itself right now, it is in a negative polarity, and that is a big part of our collective energy. Once again, going back 10 years. So we have, for us collectively, we need to look through that lens and understand why, even if there's a bright and sunny Aries new moon, and it feels like everything should be absolutely delightful, and we wonder why it is that we pick up so much of this other stuff from the collective, why we see some of these difficulties we're experiencing. It's because we can't look at just the foreground that's right in front of us. We have to kind of go from the very back, all the way forward, layer by layer. And so as we look at Uranus and we have the third layer of the painting, we then have, this sort of cloud cover. We've got, these clouds that are sort of looming up in the sky. Of course, they're going to be above where Saturn's going to be in a moment. And with Uranus, these are the, collective conversations in the psychosphere. It's the frequencies of what it is that we're all thinking about, what it is that we're trying to understand and innovate and fix collectively. And so, of course, when, Uranus was in Aries, we have, there was a lot of conversations in the psychosphere about, masculinity versus femininity. And we think about Uranus and Aries' entire transit and how those conversations went. And there was some progress that was really positive, and there was also some extremity that went all over the place. And so it's very interesting to see, of course, as Uranus has moved into Taurus, how now it's about money, and it's about, what it is that we possess, and what are the things we ought to possess or be allowed to in the first place. Should there be billionaires, and all these different questions that we're currently looking at as we're looking at the system entirely, especially our financial systems, but also, of course, what it is that we, the individual, deserve, because that question comes up a lot without almost ever being actually said in these collective conversations. What does a person deserve to be able to do, to be able to have? And so this is something that is kind of looming up above Neptune. It's sort of both behind and in front and above Neptune. And it's a very tricky energy, because these conversations, if handled appropriately, seem to lead to the top of the mountain. They seem to almost, guide the way. But they're of course, this is Uranus in Taurus, another negative polarity. And so we once again have these three extremely powerful elders, which are all in the negative polarity, and for a very long time. And just taking, these three layers of the painting, just imagining what happens when Pluto's in Aquarius, when it's in a positive polarity, and when Neptune is in Aries, where it's in a positive polarity, and then of course Uranus in Gemini, another positive polarity. So what's going to happen to us, over these next few years, especially 2025, as we start to see some of these shifts happen in the painting, in the overall color scheme of the background. And that will become more and more, kind of clear as we move through just some of these layers. So then we look at Saturn and we say, okay, so now there's like a landscape. Now we know what's in front of us. Here's the, here is the path. Here's the perspective. Here's the boundaries of reality. If I go too far this way, it's the unknown. Too far this way, it's the unknown. But here is a path, and the path leads to Neptune. And so we can just follow the path and, stay on the road, and we're good to go, and of course, it's not always going to be easy, because the path seems to go through all these winding hills, and it seems to, go through some pretty difficult areas, and the landscape itself looks pretty barren. But of course, this is bright yellow with, even with some dark flourishes because it's Saturn. But The bright yellow, of course, is in this case representing Aquarius, and it's in a positive polarity. And of course, on top of being in a positive polarity, Saturn is also in its secondary home sign. And so we definitely see a lot of strength here and a lot of stability. And we, at the very least, see a clear path to get to the mountain. But then, of course, we reach Jupiter. And so as soon as we have Jupiter, a couple interesting things happen. So first of all, this cave entrance, for the sort of mountain of Neptune, if you will, is now brightly illuminated by something mythical. So collectively, this is going to be what it is that we are being called to aim for in many different ways. Like, what's the spirit quest we're supposed to go on, and what exactly are we trying to get to? And of course, the one of the undertones of this is going to be that it's the taking the quest itself to get to that place that oftentimes is the lesson, and rather than actually getting to the destination. But we see that, and we also see these lightning bolts that are coming down of inspiration, and they are illuminating specifically the cloud cover that Uranus, had placed up in the heavens. And so it's bringing to light how change and revolution can be positive things rather than, basically change and revolution for the sake of change and revolution. And it's also, of course, taking something, Neptune, so, lofty, so seemingly far off from us, so unachievable. And with this bright illumination, it's almost making it seem obvious of exactly where to go. If we're following this internal compass, then we don't even need a sign. But of course, as we'll see later in the paintings, we will have exactly that. So we get to Jupiter, and we see that the tone of the painting has changed entirely. Jupiter is in Aries, and so this is in a positive polarity, and it is encouraging and it's exciting. And of course, with Jupiter having left Pisces, it is going to re-enter. It's going to hit 29 degrees in Pisces, during the retrograde, and then it's going to enter Aries once more, and it's going to stay there. And when Jupiter is in Aries, we of course have a great and powerful urge to improve ourselves and to go on these types of journeys in the first place. And this is the first of the 12 journeys. It's like the first archetype of the zodiac, and there's a lot of things we're going to rediscover, especially things that we may have found incredibly strong within ourselves at 12 and 24 years old, 36 and 48. Like we're going to see different things reoccurring in these 12-year increments because of Jupiter. And then of course we get to Mars, and so this is Mars in Taurus. And so yes, there's definitely like a dark color scheme, with these blues in this particular case. And the trees, though, the important thing is the trees are blocking the entrance. They're blocking some of the lightning in the painting. They're blocking very partially some of the entrance. And that is because with Mars, Mars is incredibly important. Mars in Taurus, it's telling us that there's kind of like this slow and steady trudge. It's once again Mars being in a negative polarity, Taurus. And, so there's, from Mars's point of view, this is very barren, even though we might think of Taurus itself as incredibly abundant. And so the actions that we take, though, and the action plans that we have, and the ways that we think, okay, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, and I've got to do this, these plans get in the way sometimes of the actual quest. And the trees can absolutely block our own inspiration. We can block ourselves just by trying to do everything instead of experience anything. If we don't allow ourselves to accept that we're on this quest and that it's okay for time to be taken to rest, or time to be taken to fight and face challenges, if we're not willing to accept all these different things, then the action is going to get in the way of itself, and very possibly incredibly impatiently, while Mars is in Taurus and it's not necessarily having a really fun time. It's in detriment there. It's having difficulties. And then we move on to the next layer. We move on to Venus. And so this is Venus Cancer. So once again, Venus in a negative polarity, Cancer. Now that's not to say with all these negative polarities, it's not the same as saying bad or evil, or it's not supposed to be there, or this is the worst. But it's just when you have so many different negative polarities, but you're thinking about, the Leo new moon, and you're excited about it, and you're wondering why you don't feel you don't feel optimism blooming from within, and you're questioning why it is. You're questioning, as maybe, let's just say you only follow the moon cycle and you're wondering why it's not aligning with what you're feeling, that there's a whole story to this, and it kind of puts into context and doesn't make unimportant, but definitely, it adds a lot more to the story of just the sun and the moon and what they're doing. So we have Venus, and Venus Cancer is representative. In this case, I just made it like a hut. It's like sort of like an abandoned shelter, or it might be abandoned, Venus Cancer. So this might be a place that it's like a place of refuge, and it's a place where we can heal, and a place where we can prosper and sort of like take time to rest. Or maybe it's not abandoned at all and there is someone that lives there, and perhaps it's they're absolutely ferocious in some way, or perhaps this is representing a relationship and it's representing being comforted by someone. But regardless, this is Venus Cancer, and it is definitely an emotional risk of some kind. It's in this negative polarity, and there is part of us as well that even being comforted, can, of course, by itself is a very good thing, but being comforted can be a dangerous thing if we stay in the hut too long. Maybe we stay there, we get really comfortable, we've gotten tired of this long, endless Saturnian road that leads to Neptune somewhere, and we just sort of say to ourselves, I'm just going to kick back and relax in the Venus hut, and so it doesn't necessarily seem like a bad thing at the time. But with all of this, especially in context to Jupiter, Venus, as we've added this hut, it sort of blocks the entrance almost entirely to Jupiter. And so that's one of the things we can run into. We can use the beautiful abundance of a new relationship to block our quest, which through which we become who we really are, which we would have been able to bring into the relationship, or that we even, you might say, should have brought into the relationship and didn't. And the relationship got in the way of your happiness, even though the relationship you thought was going to give you happiness. And so it's sort of, there's a lot of ways in which Venus and Jupiter are such beautiful, benefic beings in which they're, meant for goodness, and yet at the same time, Venus can absolutely get in the way of Jupiter if the Venus energy isn't, handled properly. And then, of course, we get to the moon and we get to the sun. And so basically for the moon in Virgo, at the time I'm recording this video, the moon in Virgo, it's sort of like this blood orange, shadows on one side, and for the sun, it's this, absolutely bright red. And I almost forgot Mercury. Mercury is important too. We're not going to leave out Mercury. Mercury is arguably almost one of the most important parts. We have this sign that's like standing right in front of us, and it's got an arrow. It's Mercury in Leo. It's in a positive polarity. It's as bright as can be, and it literally says, as flamboyantly as it can, go this direction. Just go here. It's a bright, shining sign, and all we've got to do is follow the sign. The sign says, keep going. So maybe stop at the Venus hut for a second, whatever that is. Maybe I need to make like a bar or something called the Venus hut. That sounds like it would be a really fun place. But Mercury in Leo is telling us to go in this direction. And then, of course, we get to the moon and we get to the sun. And so the moon is, of course, casting these shadows, and the sun is casting this light. And from these two different directions, the luminaries work together to paint the picture. The sun, also being in Leo, casts this bright red, which changes the tone of the entire painting. But the thing is, the moon is going to constantly change the subconscious shadows. It's going to constantly change the mood that we have in context to everything else that we're seeing. And the sun is going to be, each and every month changing the light. It's going to be changing the light source. And so, yes, the painting can look radically different in just the separation of 2 months from Leo back all the way to Sun in Gemini. But at the same time, there is like so much negative polarity at this current time that, basically the opportunity that's being offered here by the astrology is to like alchemize all of this negative polarity and to create something beautiful, to create something out of it that's amazing. And the thing is, for anyone who is pessimistic, when they see so much negative polarity, they see so much earth or so much water, the thing is, it's not always great when everything's in positive polarities, isn't it? Obviously, just in a cyclical sense, like the planets were all in a positive polarity sign before we got to the negative polarity. And so when they were in positive polarities, sometimes when we have abundance and free open space and things are just flowing in wonderfully, it doesn't mean we always take advantage of the opportunities that are there. And sometimes we get very comfortable because things are just sort of going on track on their own, like without our interference or without us trying to do anything. They're just going well. So why bother putting in, extra effort? Why bother, going this extra mile? Because you don't technically have to. And then, of course, we go through a massive collective shift. And, with Neptune entering Aries in 2025, we're going to be looking at this mountain, this, sort of green, icy, lofty mountain turning into a volcano all of a sudden. And it's erupting, it's going to be a lot different. The background of Pluto entering Aqua is going to go from this burnt orange over to this, incredibly bright yellow. And then, of course, with, even Jupiter, it's going to go back and forth between Pisces and Aries once more. And then it's going to enter Taurus after that, and it's going to enter a negative polarity. So these things change. The layers of the painting change. And so if we're wondering why it is that we're tracking Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and we're not necessarily feeling in line with what's there, or it feels like there's so much more to the story, or some shadow that is far, far greater, the reality is because all of these things coexist at once. We have to explore all of them at once, just like the layers of these paintings. And when all of it's put together, it's pretty wacky looking because of the color scheme, but, I think you get the idea. So for this idea and how you might apply it into your life or your practice, if you're looking at the astrology chart, take them one piece at a time. And, it's not always easy to visualize the timeline, but, think of Pluto and think of how long it's going to be in a sign versus Neptune, how long Uranus is going to be in that sign, and just imagine, if you will, or you can even draw it out just like, kind of a line of color, where red slowly turns into a darker red, slowly turning into a purple, slowly turning into a dark blue, and then into a blue. Look at these timelines as though they're colors, and you'll start to, see things differently. And for some people, they look at this as sounds. They believe that astrology can be listened to, and I think that that's another really cool approach. For me, I'm not, I haven't gotten into playing any musical instruments yet, but I definitely like, sort of exploring on the art side of things, the graphic arts, how you can sort of transfer these things into another. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this video, and I hope that it gives some context to things and that you feel less crazy, and that there's a recognition that really all of what you're seeing in the chart is important. And while it's not always easy to contextualize all of it together, especially when we throw in the aspects, which might be, just to put it in terms of this painting, could represent, Mars squaring Neptune, and you could see this boulder coming off of the Neptune mountain and, falling towards the tree and crushing it or whatever. I mean, there's ways that you could take the aspects and turn them into actions to sort of fulfill that in the painting, and that'd be a fun thing too. But if you're questioning this or struggling with this, definitely just start with the placement energy itself and kind of like look at the collective energy and see if you can, observe these different things actually happening. So I hope this has put things into context and made astrology a little more exciting or a little bit more approachable, and hopefully it didn't make things even more complicated. But for those of you that stuck around, I actually have a giveaway that I'm doing over the next 7 days. On August 8th, I'm releasing a new service called the Yearly Personal Astrologer Service. And this service is where I, send you a video each and every week that goes over your week at a glance, in context to your chart and the current astrology. And I basically just make custom horoscopes for you. And then on top of that, I'm also offering in the Yearly Personal Astrology Service some free readings throughout and some free lessons, free access to all of my classes. And I'm really excited to be offering this. And so for the giveaway, anyone that heads to jacksatlantis.com and purchases a reading will have an entry to win a free year of the personal astrology service anyone who purchases a mentorship over the next 7 days, you will get 3 entries to win the yearly personal astrologer service. So if you're interested in this, if you're sort of on the fence or you want to, look into it, if you purchase a reading or a mentorship with me, you will be entered in to win immediately. And on August 8th, I'm going to be announcing who the winner is, basically who wins an entire year of free personal astrology. So I really am excited to see you all there. Make sure and comment below if you have any questions, or head to jacksalanis.com to check out some of my other work. So thank you guys and have an awesome night.